Hello my friends, we are going to keep reading some more of The Green Glass Sea together. The last time that we read, Suze and Dewey had decided to go to the dump together. They're kind of becoming almost friends and they were just on their way. So we're going to pick back up with that at chapter 19, which is called Dump Drawers. Summer had finally come to the hill. The trees had thick green leaves, although there wasn't much shade anywhere near the road. At least there was a little bit of a breeze coming through the pines and scrub oaks to the west. The sky was a brilliant storybook blue with high, puffy white clouds. They could hear a baseball game in progress near the school, the crack of a bat and cheers, the sounds only slightly muffled by distance in the clear mountain air. It was the kind of summer day Suze loved, the kind that just might turn into an adventure. The wagon bumped and squeaked on the dirt road, rattling over ruts left from last week's rains. Most of them were as dry and brown as crusts of old bread now, but a few muddy puddles remained where the potholes were deeper. It was quiet. A lot of the men were gone, off to someplace in the southern desert called base camp. Suze didn't know where or why. It was even more secret than the usual secret stuff. Her father had gone down the day before and was going to be away for the next week. "Wait up," Dewey said. She dropped the wagon's handle and bent down to tie her shoe. Her left shoe, not the odd brown one that laced up the sides. Suze had almost forgotten about Dewey's shoes. Maybe she'd just gotten used to them while they'd been sharing a room. "Will you have to wear one of those shoes forever?" she asked after they'd started up again. "I was just wondering." "I hope not," Dewey said. "The doctor in St. Louis says there's an operation I can have that'll make my legs the same size again, but they can't do it until I'm 18, until I stop growing for sure. Then I can wear normal old shoes like everybody else." "That'll be good." "Yeah, real good." Dewey looked down at her feet. "I mean, I'm kind of used to it, but no one else ever is. I get tired of having to explain it all the time, or pretending I don't notice when people are staring." Suze felt her cheeks redden and was suddenly glad that no one paid much attention to her feet. "Yeah," she said after a minute, which seemed lame, but she couldn't think of anything else to say. They walked along past the post office, the PX, the pond. "After this picture's done, do you know what you're going to do next?" Dewey asked as they turned onto the main road and headed east. "I'm not sure." Suze had a whole pile of loose pages to cut out, and some ideas had been floating around her head as she lay in bed at night, falling asleep, but nothing had quite gelled. Maybe a grocery store. There were more food ads than anything else. Or a circus. Not with the same pictures, but those were the two ideas that kept coming back. "Maybe something with a circus," she said finally. "How about you? Are you going to make another gadget thingy?" It was Dewey's turn to think. "I don't know. I just finished a wind-up guide that rolls around, sort of in a circle. I might make a better one of those now that I've figured out most of the hard parts, but I'm not sure either." She smiled. "Maybe I'll get a good idea at the dump. It depends on what I find." "Are there magazines there?" Suze asked. "Not usually. Mostly army and science and building stuff, but you never know. It's kind of like treasure hunting, except somebody thought it was just junk." Suze nodded. "Like drawers," she said. "Not quite pirate treasure, but I hope I find one. A wooden drawer, about 2 feet wide. Oak would be nice." Suze could almost see it, a polished square full of bright colors and shapes, hanging on the bedroom wall, the wood glowing in a beam of sunlight. "What about you?" Dewey bit her lip, and Suze saw her fingers drum for a moment on the handle of the wagon as she thought. "What I really want to find is a record player. Not the needle part, that could be busted. Just the turntable, the go-round." "How come?" "It would be fun to mess with. Like if I put magnets on it so they went around, and then put a piece of glass over it or a thin enough wood and put some BBs or ball bearings on the glass, I could see how they'd move." "Would it do anything?" "Maybe," Dewey said, "but I'd have to play with it for a while and see what happened before I decided." "Yeah, I know what you mean." Suze hadn't put it into words, but that felt like what she'd been doing for the last couple of days, playing with the images until they almost seemed to go where they belonged, fitting together into a puzzle she had never seen before. She looked at Dewey out of the corner of her eye. She'd never had a conversation like this with another kid. She didn't feel like she had to be funny or try to show Dewey how smart she was. She could just... "This is it," Dewey said. The dump looked like a vacant lot, fenced on 3 sides. On the right were organized bins of different kinds of lumber, but the rest was seemingly random piles of recognizable objects in unfamiliar configurations. A stack of wall-less windows, pieces of motors and other machines, shovels with splintered handles, a steering wheel, a stack of stenciled ammo crates, the front grille to a Buick. "The furniture stuff, if there is any, is usually in the back corner," Dewey said. "I'm going to check out the little junk boxes over here." She pointed to her right. "You can take the wagon. Yell if you need help yanking something out." Suze nodded and picked up the handle of the red wagon. She'd had one like it when she was in kindergarten, but she was much taller now, more than 5 feet, and had to bend her knees a little as she pulled it around the corner of a wall of construction metal, some rusty, some shiny in the afternoon sun. Her eyes widened and her heart raced, just a little, when she saw 4 desks lined up against the chain-link fence. 3 of them were metal, army green and battleship gray, but one was wood, like the teachers' desks in her old school in Berkeley, except painted a pale institutional green. To get to the desk, Suze had to abandon the wagon and climb over a stack of fluorescent light fixtures and around a varnished wooden door propped up against them. She barked her shin on the edge of the door, but it just scraped off a little skin and didn't bleed. She tried to remember if she'd had a tetanus shot, but that was for rusty nails, and the door was only wood. It wouldn't matter, she hoped. The desk had a huge missing piece from the back corner, which was probably why it was at the dump, and 7 drawers. 3 deep ones were stacked along each side, and a wide, shallow one ran across the middle, above where her knees would go. That one was perfect, not quite 2 feet across and 2 inches deep. She tugged at it, but there was some sort of catch at the back to stop a person from accidentally pulling it all the way out, spilling paper clips and rubber bands all over the floor. By the time she'd crawled underneath and released the catch, her hands and knees were covered with dirt. Suze pulled the drawer out, admired it for a minute. It might be oak under the paint, then lifted it over the stack of fixtures, propping it carefully on the other side so it wouldn't get scratched up. She looked at the other desks and decided, after some deliberation, that they were too metal and ugly, and there wasn't anything to do about that. She clambered back over the fixtures and put the good drawer into the wagon. Dewey knelt in front of a line of gray metal boxes with lots of dials. She was using a screwdriver to pry off a black bakelite knob. The stubs of metal on the fronts of the boxes were all that was left of the other knobs, which lay in a small pile next to her knees. The wagon's wheels crunched in the dirt, and Dewey looked over her shoulder. "Find one?" she asked. Suze grinned and pushed a strand of hair off her sweaty, dusty face. "Yeah, the rest were metal, or way too deep." The knob came off in Dewey's hand with a small popping sound. She dropped it onto the pile with the others and stood up. "That's a good one," she said, wiping her hands on a bandana from her pocket. "It's great," Suze said. She ran a finger lightly over the smooth painted front of the drawer. "I can't wait to get home and see how everything fits. Are you going to look for any more junk?" She'd been about to say junk, but that sounded like an insult she didn't mean. She groped for a word. "Any more, paraphernalia?" She grinned. It was one of her favorite big words. Dewey laughed, an explosive little laugh that came out part snort, part Bronx cheer. "Yeah, right," she said. She looked around. "No, I think I'm done for today. It's hot." She bent down, scooped up the little pile of black knobs, and put them inside the drawer. She patted her pockets. "I'd say let's go get Cokes, but I didn't bring any money." Suze reached into her own pocket and held up a nickel. "This is enough for a pack of Kool-Aid. We can make it when we get back." "Not the lemon lime." Dewey made a face. "No, ick." Suze pulled the collar of her shirt over her face and wiped some of the sweat off, tasting gritty salt and hot cotton, then picked up the handle of the wagon. They walked back along the road in a satisfied silence, punctuated by the slightly arrhythmic sound of the wagon's mismatched wheels and the staccato clatter of the knobs in the wooden drawer. Suze felt good. She'd found treasure, and she'd been to a brand new part of the hill, new to her anyway, an adventure. She began to whistle, sort of in time with their steps, the Colonel Bogey March. As she launched into it for a second time, she was astonished to hear Dewey begin to sing the words the boys sang on the playground, if no teacher was within earshot. Suze joined in on the second line, and they sang it together. Then both burst out laughing. Suze reached down and slung her free arm around Dewey's shoulder. Then they sang it a third time at the top of their lungs, like pirates returning home with a trunk full of particularly glorious booty. As they rounded a corner, Suze took a deep breath and started another chorus. She stopped singing and stood stock still. Joyce and Barbara, in full Girl Scout regalia, stood on the porch of the post office. "Well, my stars and garters," said Joyce in a fakey grown-up voice. "What do we have here?" She stepped off onto the hard-packed dirt and smiled a little half-smile that made Suze nervous. "Look, Barb," said Joyce, "it's the Sad Sack Club. Screwy Dewey, founder and president. Or have you taken over now?" she said, looking at Suze. Suze didn't answer, but she felt her cheeks going red and felt Dewey stiffen under her arm. Neither of them moved. "Why, they've been rag-picking. It must be the initiation to join the club," Joyce said. She took another step toward them, and her gold trefoil Girl Scout pin winked in the bright sun. "Mind your own beeswax," Suze said. She gripped the wagon handle tighter and felt Dewey start to move out from under her arm. Suze almost let her go, because maybe there was still time to... And then she stopped. To what? To pretend she hadn't been to the dump with Dewey? But she had, and it had been fun. Suze looked down at the drawer in the wagon. Just a minute ago, she'd been excited to get back home, to start fitting the pieces of her collage into it. That had been a good feeling, and she wanted it back. Wanted it more fiercely than she'd known. Wanted it a lot more than she cared if Joyce liked her or not. She took a deep breath and squeezed Dewey's shoulder, just once, and Dewey stood still. "We should get going," Barbara said to Joyce's back. "The other girls are coming at 5, and we still have to make tea." "Oh, we've got time. Don't you want to see what the trash of the day is?" Joyce took a quick step over the wagon and reached down toward the pile of knobs. Knobs, she said. Now there's something every girl needs. Leave 'em alone, said Suze. She dropped the wagon handle. Joyce ignored her. And a drawer. I guess they don't have real furniture over in Morganville. She looked at Dewey. That's mine, Suze said through her teeth. Leave it alone. Oh, it's a special drawer, Joyce said in her talking to baby's voice and reached for it. Without thinking, Suze let go of Dewey, took a step forward, grabbed Joyce by the knot of her big yellow Girl Scout neckerchief, and pushed her away. Hard. Joyce stumbled back. Her feet hit the edge of a puddle, and she went sprawling into the mud, landing with a great splosh, and sat there, stunned. Nobody moved. After a few seconds, Barbara walked over and offered her a hand. Joyce stood up, glaring at Suze. The back of her green Girl Scout dress was soaked with mud, and her beret had fallen off when she landed. It lay in the puddle, sodden as a wet toad. Now you've done it, truck, Joyce said in a tight, angry voice. I'm telling my mother. I bet she'll make you pay for a whole new uniform. Suze stared at her. What did you call me? Truck, Barbara said. She stood next to Joyce. That's what everyone calls you. Big, fat, pushy steamroller truck, Joyce said, enunciating each word. Suze stood by the wagon, her arms hanging at her sides. Truck? She felt her eyes sting and wiped her face brusquely with the back of her hand. She took a deep breath. Sticks and stone. Then Dewey stepped forward and spit right onto Joyce's brown Oxfords. You're all wet, she said, and crossed her arms over her chest. Barbara's father's gonna put you scrags in the brig. Just wait, Joyce said in a low voice. Color me so yellow, Dewey replied. She turned to Suze. Kool-Aid? She asked, and without a glance back, began to walk toward the PX. Suze nodded but said nothing. She picked up the handle of the wagon and followed Dewey, looking over her shoulder every few seconds, just in case, but the other girls didn't move. They were almost to the PX before either of them spoke. You knew? Suze asked. Truck? Yeah, I'd heard, Dewey shrugged, but not as much as I'd heard Screwy Dewey. I've been wanting to spit for a long time. Yeah, but now we're foobar, aren't we? Completely foobar, Suze agreed. Barbara's dad's brass. She thought for a moment. I don't think there's really a brig, though, at least not for civilians. Probably not, but I bet your mom will think of something. Suze groaned. Yeah, that's the truth. You still want Kool-Aid? Dewey shook her head. I'm thirsty, but we ought to get back and clean up before the tech whistle blows. Suze looked down at her dirty knees. It couldn't hurt. They pulled the wagon under the stairs of the apartment building. Dewey shoved most of the knobs into her pockets, and Suze cradled the drawer in her arms. For once, I'm glad there aren't any phones, Suze said. We're probably safe until after dinner, if Mom even comes home. But just the same, they tiptoed up the stairs and let themselves into the kitchen without banging the screen door. Suze put the drawer down on the tabletop. She turned toward the living room doorway and then stopped, her mouth open in shock. Her mother was already home, sitting on the living room couch. She looked like she'd been crying. And that wasn't all. Oppie was sitting right next to her, looking skinny and tired. Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, the head of the whole hill, his expression official and serious. It wasn't possible. Joyce couldn't have told already. We're really foobar, she whispered to Dewey. Look. Dewey dropped her knobs into the drawer and came up behind Suze. Oh geez, she said, shaking her head. This isn't good. Suze looked at the back door. Maybe they could. Then she sighed. We might as well get it over with. She squared her shoulders, took a deep breath, and walked into the living room. Dewey was right behind her. Her mother looked up at the sound of her footsteps, bit her lip, and then looked at Dewey. Girls, sit down, Mrs. Gordon said, and her voice quavered. Suze had never heard her sound like that before. They sat, one on each chair, and Suze braced herself for the biggest lecture of her whole life. Then, Oppie spoke. I'm sorry, he said quietly. He held up a piece of flimsy yellow paper, a telegram. There's been an accident. Alright, so that is where we're going to leave it for today. Kind of a cliffhanger, but it sounds like it's bad news. So make sure you stay tuned for tomorrow's video, and we will find out what kind of bad news the head of the whole hill came to the Gordon's house to deliver. Alright, bye guys.